So I'm Harvey Newman. I'm a professor of physics at Caltech. My main field is particle physics, otherwise known as high energy physics. And I also tend to teach freshmen here at Caltech, especially the freshmen who are ready for a more advanced treatment of introductory physics.
Could you give me a quick overview of your research?
Particle physics studies the most fundamental constituents and also the nature and evolution of the universe. And the way that we do that in high-energy physics, one way is to collide particles at the highest possible energy, both studying the theory that we know in greater and greater precision, looking for deviations from that, but even more important, with sufficient energy, looking to create new particles, extract information about new interactions beyond what we already understand. So other parts of our field, which are closely related, are astrophysics and cosmology, looking out over the greatest distances in order to understand the nature of our universe, its structure, its evolution. And of course, a lot of that is governed from the beginning by the fundamental interactions that we also study in particle physics. So my research at the moment is centered at CERN in Geneva, where we have the Large Hadron Collider, which provides collisions at the highest possible energies for now. Also, we engage many students here at Caltech in research, both during the summer, but there also are flexible arrangements we can make where they can work during the academic year and, for example, analyze data. Some of them can also participate in shifts in operating the experiments, helping remotely over the internet, and so on.
That's really interesting. So, what were some of your most significant findings or publications?
Oh, yes. So there are many. So when I was a student, my thesis experiment discovered that the rate of electron-positron collisions at the then highest energy, which was a small fraction of what we produce today, by a factor of several thousand, the interaction rate was much more than expected. It was a complete surprise. And that is because we did a number of things that happened. One was we had enough energy to create the fourth quark flavors. So we know now there are six quark flavors, and the different quarks have different masses. And for the heavier masses, you need enough energy to produce those particles. So in my experiment, which was based at a small accelerator called the Cambridge Electron Accelerator near Harvard, we're able to produce the fourth flavor of quark called the charm quark for the first time. And that was one contribution. The other is there was an hypothesized but never proven extra quantum number. But it means there is another aspect called color, and that added a factor of 3 to the production rate. And then finally, beyond quarks, you can also create other particles out of the quarks, and that also contributed. So overall, it was really a large factor bigger than what was expected. Then I moved to first CERN and then to the laboratory called DAISY in Germany. And at Germany, we, again, working at higher energy, we discovered events which showed that the carrier of the strong force, the force that binds nuclei together, that particle actually was produced called a gluon. So I was one of the main discoverers of the gluon, this fundamental particle that binds nuclei together. Later, I joined the experiment at the Large Hadron Collider, which is called CMS in 1994. I'd worked at the superconducting super collider, but as many of you know, that wasn't continued. So in 1994, I joined an experiment at the Large Hadron Collider. And in 2012, we discovered the Higgs boson. The Higgs boson is a particle associated with a field called the Higgs field that fills the entire universe and is responsible for giving masses to the elementary particles, the fundamental particles that make up matter.
Yeah, that's so cool. And then, how did you get interested in research in the first place?
So when I was, very young, I used to read an awful lot. And I read about physics, astrophysics, particle physics. I was a student at MIT, and I met my advisor who was working in particle physics. and he was running experiments at the nearby Cambridge Electron Accelerator, which is at Harvard, just about 2 miles from MIT. And so I had an opportunity early on to join the research group starting in my second year at MIT. And then we used to run that experiment. It was a much smaller experiment, but the team was also much smaller. And so we learned a lot about many things in building the experiment and operating it, about the accelerator, about the physics, and it was really exciting. So then when I graduated and I had that first unexpected result, then because of that, then I was able to get a position at CERN, and I worked there starting in 1974. And then I moved to Daisy in Hamburg in 1978. It's been an exciting career because we've had several discoveries along the way. Even more exciting, being at the Large Hadron Collider, a few years ago, we expected that we understood what would come next after this so-called standard model, which embodies everything that we know, called supersymmetry. And there are many compelling reasons why it should exist. It has room to explain dark matter. It explains certain symmetries, certain fundamental laws that we know. It's not there in the simple ways that we envisage. Maybe it's there, but it's more subtle. So physicists often think that this is like the ideal situation. We can explore more and more into an unknown domain through our tools, through our accelerators, our detectors, the methods that we use to extract new signals from the data, which are advancing very rapidly. We really don't know what is that more fundamental theory that we know does exist. How do we know it exists? Well, for example, we see dark matter. We know there is dark energy that's causing the outer reaches of the universe to expand. If we take our theory and try to project back to the early moments of the universe when the energy scale was enormously much higher than now, sort of an enormous temperature, the theory doesn't work at all. So the physics of the early universe had to be somehow different. So we're exploring, and we know that there's something out there, but we don't know what it is.
Yeah, okay. That's so interesting. So, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced in research, and how did you overcome them?
In order to do the investigations, there's continuous development of new types of particle detectors and also increasing their capabilities for detection. Since we don't have a lot of time, let me jump to a present looking forward a bit, which is really fascinating. So with all our developments, one thing which is just coming to the fore is to take advantage of quantum physics and quantum information. And that will create a revolution in our ability to detect processes with much greater precision and sensitivity. So that's one thing. The other challenges, there are many other challenges. I mean, these biggest experiments take a worldwide collaboration, and you have to bring physics groups together from out the world, and you have to enable them to collaborate in building the experiment and operating it, and especially in analyzing the data. And the volume of data itself has been an enormous challenge. So, I mean, I've been involved in multiple technologies and originating those. But when I first came to Caltech, I had the problem of thinking about how I was going to have my experiments overseas, and, my base would be at Caltech. So I sort of invented international networking for my field, and I ran the networks across the Atlantic in support of high energy and nuclear physics from 1985, more or less, till 2015. And so I'm still working on those networks and worldwide systems of a type that don't exist elsewhere up to the present day to overcome the challenges, the challenges of technology, the challenges of how to build intelligent systems that bring all these sites together and make use of facilities distributed throughout the world, and enabling people throughout the world to collaborate with increasing volumes of data, which on a scale which hasn't been done before. So there are many challenges in many areas of technologies. Those are just a few examples, but it is the power of experimental physicists, especially in my field, that in pursuing our science mission, that we grapple with multiple technologies at once. And when we encounter challenges, whether there are specific technologies or higher level system challenges, that we just go after it.
Yeah, okay. And then which person or mentor in your field has made the biggest impact on you?
So I have a friend, my mentor. Of course, there are several mentors, but among those, the most important is Samuel Ting, the Nobel Prize winner in 1976. I joined his group while I was at MIT. I mean, my thesis advisor was actually someone else named Professor Lewis Osborne. But for the person who influenced me the most, it was really Sam Ting. The way he did his work, the sort of incredible depth of commitment he has to the field, that kind of inspired me. And also, I mean, I found that we had a very good relationship. And so a lot of my innovations were recognized very well by him. And became a strong supporter. And so that was very important in my career.
And then I know that you've touched on this already, but where do you see your research field expanding to? So, like, what are some interesting topics that can be further explored within the next 5 to 10 years?
So I'd like to return. I mean, in particle physics itself, it takes a long time to build experiments and the facilities that enable them. And so there is a plan for a much larger accelerator in Switzerland and France, which will have a circumference of about 90 kilometers. Large Hadron Collider is 27 kilometers. And so that will enable us to access a new energy range. There also are important projects, astrophysics, and in particular, there are new observatories which are coming online. We already had a recent one which released its first set of data that really revolutionized our understanding of the early universe, but also the nature of dark energy, that it might actually be evolving in ways that we didn't understand before. In the future, we'll have even more sensitive facilities which will be able to measure more galaxies with greater precision. Also, there are other things like what's called the cosmic microwave background left over from the Big Bang. Studying that tells us a lot about the early universe, even in moments before the universe became transparent to light, which occurred about 400,000 years after the Big Bang. So we're getting to study better and better the universe and its evolution. And one of the rising mysteries is the rate of expansion of the universe. If it all came from one Big Bang, you'd expect that there would be a sort of uniform expansion rate that you could measure. But measurements which relate to different periods of our different ages in the universe after the Big Bang are coming up with somewhat different numbers, a little bit different, but significantly different. And it's called, the expansion rate is parameterized by something called the Hubble parameter. And the Hubble parameter seems to have different values at different ages of the universe. And that really is a mystery. So, but that's what drives us. I mean, I should mention that beyond the science, there are a couple of things to say about our field. Because of the ability to grapple with these great fundamental questions, and because young people can actually contribute to this, we have an important role in bringing young people into science in the first place, and also develop the skills to contribute to society. Most of us don't stay in academia and go out into the world and solve problems. Some solve problems working for companies, some start their own companies. There have been a lot of innovators that came out of our field, and that's very important to society.
Yeah, okay. And then moving on to like questions geared towards high schoolers, how did you find your passion for physics? And like, how would you suggest high schoolers try to find their own passions in research?
So if you look at various things, you can appreciate at an early age both the fantastic nature of the universe in which we live. Day by day, we often don't think of the universe on a large scale, but there are experiences. So, for example, I grew up in New York, and I would go occasionally to the Hayden Planetarium, and it would tell you about what was known about the universe, stars, galaxies, groups of galaxies, and what was happening as known up to that time, and that was really exciting. So then, I would sort of read a lot about that, but also other parts of physics. and become, very interested in that. Well, I got started early, but not until I was already at MIT, sort of in my second year there, which was at age 17. But I think there are opportunities for people in high school to read about, learn about, get familiar with the basic ideas, and get prepared to contribute. One thing which is really great about young people, more now than in the past, is, many of them are very computer literate and also get involved in developments in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and we're all grappling with new things like generative AI and large language models that sort of have some characteristics which relate to human intelligence or human-like intelligence. So I think there's a lot that what young people can do to prepare themselves and then start early in contributing.
Yeah, okay. And then what traits define a great researcher in their field? And like what type of traits would you look for in a potential lab member?
First is sort of deep interest, such deep interest that you become committed to a grand mission. Why do physicists like myself have special abilities? I mean, the nature, the character is such that, again, you're committed to the mission, you know about its importance, both in the long term for civilization and in the short term for society. And therefore, as you encounter problems, you realize that in service of the mission, you will learn various things in order to solve problems and help contribute and help advance things and hopefully advance to the next round of discoveries. Another thing is a great curiosity and a drive to learn. What makes students here at my institution at Caltech really powerful is not only their innate ability, but their drive to learn and their commitment to learn and the ability to learn new things. That's really characteristic of scientists, but also, like I said, even if you don't remain a physicist or a scientist, you become a problem solver and you become less daunted by, challenges that others feel are beyond them. So that's a real important characteristic.
And then I know that you touched upon like computer like literacy, but what kind of skills can high schoolers develop even if they don't have access to a lab or any like fancy materials?
First is to learn how to code and solve problems and apply things. I mean, I think that, there are now these days, you can run models even on your laptop or desktop. Sometimes you find programs like bridge programs which enable you to participate in research. And if that's the case, you definitely take advantage of it. We are very busy also, and we do deal with, undergraduate and graduate students at the university. So we don't have that much time to work with high school students, but there are examples. So if the opportunity comes along, then take advantage of it. There are also programs which you have to look for. So for example, with respect to CERN in Geneva, there's a thing called, I think it's like beams for schools. You can propose and carry out an experiment at an accelerator, and you can learn many things and sort of get into the whole subject of experimental research. And there are other opportunities like that.
And then just for our final question, what kind of tips would you give to a high schooler who's looking to go into your field?
Read, learn. There are a lot of online resources. You can find the level that most suits you. So, for example, there are certain beginning books, like one is called The Ideas of Particle Physics, and there are other introductory books. And you can find one which will explain the concepts. Then there are other resources in my field. Every summer, there is a series of lectures for summer students. They are originally for the students who are at CERN, but they're all recorded. And so whenever I have a student starting with me, then I recommend that among the things they do early on is to follow some of those lectures. And there also are free courses, like one given by my friend at the University of Geneva, Professor Martin Pohl, about an introduction to particle physics. And I think those courses are very accessible.
So that's all the questions that I have for today, and thank you so much for doing this again.